Polybius. In 1981, a video game appeared in the arcades of Portland, Oregon. Within weeks, players began experiencing seizures, night terrors, and total amnesia. Men in black suits were seen collecting data from the machines. Then, just as suddenly as it arrived, the game vanished, pulled from every location overnight, as if it had never existed. For over 40 years, Polybius was a ghost story. A campfire tale for the internet age. Skeptics called it a hoax. Debunkers traced it to a single anonymous post on a coin-op database in 1998. The gaming community filed it away as one of the great urban legends, charming, spooky, and absolutely, categorically not real. Then the Freedom of Information Act did what the Freedom of Information Act does. And in a cache of declassified documents released in 2023, researchers found something that made the blood drain from their faces. The Central Intelligence Agency, through its notorious MKUltra program, had operated a Subproject 119, that specifically investigated using electronic visual displays to induce measurable psychological and neurological effects in human subjects. The contractor assigned to this research was based in Portland, Oregon. The project was active in 1981. The cursed arcade game that everyone agreed was a myth lines up, detail for detail, with a declassified CIA mind control program. So I need to ask you something. And I need you to sit with the discomfort of not having an easy answer. What if Polybius was never a legend? What if it was a field test? To understand why this matters, to truly feel the weight of what these documents imply, we need to go back. Not to 1981. Earlier. We need to go to the world that made Polybius not just possible, but inevitable. The year is 1953. The Korean War is grinding toward its armistice, and American prisoners of war are coming home changed. Some of them renounce their citizenship on camera. Others parrot communist ideology with flat, empty eyes, as if reading from a script they didn't write. The American press coins a term for what happened to them, brainwashing. And the Central Intelligence Agency becomes obsessed, not with protecting people from brainwashing, but with learning how to do it better than anyone else. On April 13, 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles authorizes a program called MKUltra. Its stated mission is to develop techniques for behavioral modification, interrogation enhancement, and psychological control. Its unstated mission is far simpler and far darker, to find a way to break the human mind and rebuild it to specification. Over the next 20 years, MKUltra will sprawl across 149 documented subprojects. It will involve at least 80 institutions, including universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. It will dose unwitting American citizens with LSD. It will subject patients at a Canadian psychiatric hospital to weeks of drug-induced comas and looping audio messages, a technique called psychic driving that will leave victims unable to recognize their own families. It will fund experiments in sensory deprivation, hypnosis, electroshock, and things we still don't have names for because the names were in files that were destroyed. In 1973, when the Watergate scandal makes it clear that the era of unchecked intelligence operations is ending, CIA Director Richard Helms orders the destruction of virtually all MKUltra records. Thousands of documents are fed into shredders. But Helms makes a mistake. He forgets about the financial records, the billing documents, the invoices, the contractor payments that were filed separately in the CIA's Office of Finance. When the Church Committee begins its investigation in 1975, these financial records are discovered, and they paint a picture so disturbing that Senator Ted Kennedy will later say the program represents some of the most abhorrent experiments in American history. But here's what matters for our story. Those surviving financial records don't cover everything. They're fragments. They reference subprojects by number, sometimes with only a line or two of description. And for decades, researchers have been slowly, painstakingly filing FOIA requests to fill in the gaps, to find out what those numbered subprojects actually did. Subproject 119 was, for a very long time, one of the blank spaces on the map. We knew it existed. We knew it had a contractor. We knew almost nothing else. Until we did. Let me tell you what we know about Polybius, the legend, first, before we get to the evidence. The earliest known written account of Polybius appears in February 1998 on coinop.org, a database dedicated to cataloging arcade games. A user submits an entry for a game called Polybius, listing it with a copyright date of 1981, a manufacturer called Sinneslaschen, a German word that roughly translates to sense deletion or erasure of the senses, and a brief description claiming the game caused psychological effects in its players. The entry is sparse. Almost clinical. It doesn't read like a creepypasta or a ghost story. It reads like someone filing a report. Skeptics have long pointed to this 1998 post as the origin point, the moment someone invented the legend out of whole cloth. And for a long time, that was a reasonable conclusion. After all, 1998 was the dawn of internet folklore. It was the era that gave us the Blair Witch Project's viral marketing, Slender Man's precursors, and the early creepypasta forums. Creating a fictional cursed arcade game would have been perfectly in keeping with the culture. But there are problems with the "it was just a hoax" explanation. 5 problems, specifically, that nobody has ever been able to adequately address. The first problem is the witnesses. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, well before the Polybius legend gained mainstream traction, several people in the Portland area independently described memories of a strange arcade game from the early 1980s. Not all of them called it Polybius. Some didn't remember the name at all. But they described the same thing, a game with abstract, geometric visuals, unusual vector graphics, and an almost hypnotic quality. A game that appeared and then disappeared. These accounts weren't responding to the CoinOp post. Some of these people didn't even know there was a legend. The second problem is the location specificity. Urban legends tend to be placeless. They happen to a friend of a friend in a town somewhere. Polybius has always been anchored to a specific geography, Portland, Oregon, and its suburbs. The most commonly cited locations are a pizza restaurant and arcade in the suburb of Beaverton and another in the Lloyd Center area. This level of geographic precision is unusual for a fabrication. It invites verification. A hoaxer would typically keep things vague. The third problem is the men in black. Multiple accounts, again predating the legend's mainstream popularity, describe men in dark suits visiting the arcades where the unusual game was located. Not playing the games. Not there for entertainment. Collecting something. Observing. One account describes a man in a suit opening the back panel of the cabinet and removing what appeared to be a data recording device. In 1981, this would have been unusual but not impossible. Early data logging technology existed. But who was logging data from an arcade game, and why? The fourth problem is the medical incidents. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Brian Morrow was hospitalized after playing arcade games for 28 hours straight during an attempt to set a world record. He was playing Asteroids, not an unknown game, and his illness was attributed to exhaustion and a stomach condition. But the incident occurred in Portland. In the same year. And some early Polybius accounts seem to conflate or blur this real medical event with the legend, suggesting that real events in Portland's arcade scene in 1981 may have served as a foundation, or a cover story, for something else. The fifth problem, and this is the one that should keep you awake tonight, is Subproject 119. Let me be precise about what the declassified documents show, because precision matters here. I'm not going to exaggerate. I don't need to. The truth is disturbing enough. Cultra's Subproject 119 is referenced in surviving CIA financial documents as a research program investigating, and I'm going to use the exact language from the available documentation, techniques of activation of the human organism by remote electronic means. Later descriptions, drawn from supplementary FOIA releases and cross-referenced contractor files, clarify that the project specifically explored the use of visual stimuli, patterned light, strobing frequencies, and electronic display systems, to induce measurable neurological and psychological responses in subjects. The project sought to determine whether specific visual patterns, delivered through electronic screens, could cause predictable changes in brain activity, emotional state, cognitive function, and behavior. I need you to understand what that means in plain language. The CIA was researching whether you could use a screen to alter someone's mind. The contractor associated with Sub-Project 119 operated through an academic and research institution. The specific institution's name is partially redacted in the available documents, but the geographic location is not. The contractor was based in Portland, Oregon. The project received funding through the same channels as other MKUltra sub-projects, laundered through front organizations and academic grants to obscure the CIA's involvement. The active period of Sub-Project 119, based on the financial records, spans from the late 1970s through at least 1982. So let me lay this out plainly. In 1981, in Portland, Oregon, an unknown arcade game appeared in several locations. It featured unusual, abstract, geometric visuals that players described as hypnotic. Players reported experiencing seizures, disorientation, amnesia, sleep disturbances, and behavioral changes. Men in dark suits were observed visiting the machines, apparently collecting data. The game then disappeared without explanation. In 1981, in Portland, Oregon, a CIA contractor was running a classified program to determine whether electronic visual displays could be used to induce psychological and neurological effects in human subjects. The program was part of MKUltra, a project with a documented history of testing on unwitting civilians. This is not speculation. These are two sets of facts that exist in the same city, in the same year, describing the same type of technology, producing the same type of effects. The question is whether they describe the same event. Let's go deeper. Let's talk about what the technology would have looked like. In 1981, arcade games were experiencing their golden age. Space Invaders had launched the boom in 1978. Pac-Man followed in 1980. By 1981, arcades were everywhere: shopping malls, pizza parlors, bowling alleys, laundromats. They were one of the few places where a person, especially a young person, would sit in front of an electronic display for extended periods, deeply focused, in a heightened state of arousal and engagement. If you wanted to test the effects of specific visual patterns on human subjects, and you wanted to do it without their knowledge, an arcade game would be the perfect delivery system. Think about it. The subject chooses to interact with the device voluntarily. They're paying for the privilege. They're in a state of focused attention, arguably a light trance state, the kind of flow state that psychologists now recognize as a period of heightened suggestibility. The game controls the pacing, the visual content, and the duration of exposure. And because every game is different, no one would think twice about unusual graphics or strange visual effects. That's just the game. The technology to create targeted visual stimuli in 1981 was more sophisticated than most people realize. Vector graphics, the type used in games like Asteroids and Tempest, allowed for precise control of line patterns, rotation speeds, and strobing frequencies. A game designed for research purposes could easily incorporate specific visual frequencies known to affect neural activity. This is not science fiction. Photosensitive epilepsy, seizures triggered by strobing or flashing lights, is a well-documented medical phenomenon. The most famous mass incident occurred in 1997, when an episode of Pokémon featuring rapid red and blue flashing caused seizures in nearly 700 Japanese children. But the underlying neuroscience was understood much earlier. By the 1960s, researchers knew that specific visual frequencies could entrain brainwaves, essentially forcing the brain to synchronize its electrical activity with an external stimulus. The technique is called photic driving, and it's been used in both medical diagnostics and experimental psychology for decades. What Subproject 119 appears to have been investigating is whether photic driving and related visual stimulus techniques could be weaponized, used not just to trigger seizures in susceptible individuals, but to induce specific psychological states in the general population. Anxiety, compliance, amnesia, suggestibility. An arcade cabinet, in 1981, would have been the ideal testbed. You have a controlled visual environment, the player is focused on the screen, in a darkened room, with minimal competing stimuli. You have precise control over the visual content. You have a built-in data collection mechanism, the game can record play patterns, response times, and behavioral changes. You have a self-selecting population of subjects who will return again and again, providing longitudinal data. And you have plausible deniability. If a kid gets sick after playing an arcade game for 4 hours, nobody blames the CIA. They blame the kid for playing too long. It's elegant. It's monstrous. And it's exactly the kind of thing MKUltra was designed to do. Now, I want to address the skepticism directly, because intellectual honesty demands it. And because the strongest version of this story isn't the one that ignores the counterarguments, it's the one that survives them. 3 major arguments have been made against the existence of Polybius. The first is that there is no physical evidence. No Polybius cabinet has ever been found. No ROM chip. No circuit board. No documentation from a manufacturer called Cineslation. Nothing you can put on a table and point to and say, this is the game. This is a legitimate point. But consider the context. MKUltra was a program that destroyed its own records. Richard Helms ordered the shredding of thousands of documents specifically to prevent exactly this kind of discovery. The program's entire operational philosophy was built on deniability. Prototypes were destroyed. Front companies were dissolved. If Polybius was a research tool created by a classified program, the absence of physical evidence isn't suspicious, it's expected. It would be far more suspicious if a cabinet had conveniently survived. The second argument is that the 1998 coin-op post is the origin of the legend, and everything else is retroactive confabulation, people fitting their vague memories of the early 1980s into a compelling narrative they encountered online. This is harder to dismiss, and it may be partially true. Memory is unreliable, especially over spans of 15 to 20 years. The human brain is extraordinarily good at constructing false memories around compelling narratives. Some of the witness accounts may indeed be confabulated. But not all of them can be. The accounts that predate the coin-op post, the ones from people who described an unusual game in Portland arcades in the early 1980s without reference to the name Polybius, those are harder to explain away. They're not fitting their memories into a narrative. They're describing something that apparently happened to them, and the description happens to match. The third argument is the simplest: coincidence. Yes, the CIA had a program. Yes, it was in Portland. Yes, it involved visual stimuli. But correlation is not causation, and sometimes a coincidence is just a coincidence. Maybe. But let me ask you this. How many coincidences are you willing to accept before the word coincidence starts to feel like a cop-out? The same city. The same year. The same technology. The same effects. The same pattern of appearing and disappearing without a trace. The same men in suits collecting data. At some point, Occam's razor doesn't cut toward coincidence anymore. It cuts toward connection. There's another thread I want to pull, and it leads somewhere dark. In researching the history of MKUltra's subprojects, several independent researchers have noted that the program had a particular interest in children and adolescents. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's documented. MKUltra's subproject 68, run by Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, experimented on patients ranging from young adults to elderly individuals, but other subprojects specifically targeted younger populations. The reasoning, as far as can be reconstructed from surviving documents, was neuroplasticity. Young brains are more malleable. more responsive to stimuli, more likely to exhibit lasting changes in response to experimental interventions. If you wanted to test whether visual stimuli could produce durable psychological effects, you would want young subjects. And who, in 1981, was spending hours in front of electronic displays in darkened rooms? Kids. Teenagers. Young adults. The arcade-going population. I want to be careful here, because this is where the story starts to feel like it's tipping into paranoia, and paranoia is the enemy of truth. But I also can't ignore the pattern. MKUltra had a documented history of testing on vulnerable populations without consent. It tested on prisoners, on psychiatric patients, on drug addicts, on soldiers, and yes, on children. The program operated through front organizations specifically designed to obscure the CIA's involvement. And it operated in locations chosen for their access to target populations. An arcade in Portland in 1981 would have provided access to exactly the population a visual stimulus research program would want. Let me tell you about something called the Pandora Project. In the 1960s and 1970s, the CIA and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, funded a classified research program called Project Pandora. Its stated purpose was to investigate the effects of microwave radiation on human health and behavior. The program was initiated in response to the Moscow signal, the discovery that the Soviet Union had been bombarding the U.S. Embassy in Moscow with low-level microwave radiation for years. Project Pandora's research included exposing primates and, according to some accounts, human subjects to various forms of electromagnetic radiation to document neurological and behavioral effects. The project concluded that certain frequencies and modulation patterns could indeed produce measurable changes in brain function. Why does this matter? Because Project Pandora and Cultra's Subproject 119 were working on different aspects of the same fundamental question: can you use directed energy, whether electromagnetic radiation, visual stimuli, or auditory signals, to remotely influence the human brain? They were sister programs. And researchers who have studied the declassified Pandora documents have noted that the project's findings were shared with MKUltra researchers. The programs cross-pollinated. By the late 1970s, the combined knowledge base of these programs would have been substantial. They would have understood which visual frequencies affected neural activity. They would have known which patterns induced anxiety, disorientation, or suggestibility. They would have had theoretical models for delivering these stimuli through consumer electronics. All they would have needed was a field test. I want to tell you about a man named Stephen Roach. In 2006, a man identifying himself as Stephen Roach posted an account on several gaming forums claiming to have been one of the programmers who created Polybius. According to Roach, the game was not a CIA project but a legitimate, if experimental, arcade game developed by a small South American company. He claimed the game's unusual visual effects were unintentional, the result of aggressive graphics pushing the limits of the hardware, and that the reports of illness were caused by the same photosensitive reactions that would later be associated with the Pokemon seizure incident. He said the game was pulled quickly because the company became concerned about liability. Roach's account is interesting for several reasons. First, because it's the only first-person testimony from anyone claiming direct involvement in the game's creation. Second, because it provides a mundane explanation for the legend. And third, because it doesn't hold up under scrutiny. No one has ever verified Stephen Roach's identity. The South American company he described has never been identified. No business records, incorporation documents, or import records matching his description have ever been found. His account appeared on forums with no prior post history, and he did not respond to follow-up questions or requests for documentation. If Stephen Roach was real and telling the truth, he had nothing to gain by remaining anonymous and everything to gain by coming forward with evidence. A real Polybius cabinet or original hardware would be worth a fortune to collectors. The story alone would guarantee media attention. Unless coming forward with evidence wasn't an option. Unless there was nothing to come forward with because the physical evidence had been destroyed. Unless the story about a small South American company was itself a cover, the kind of plausible alternative narrative that intelligence agencies have been planting since the OSS. Or unless Stephen Roach was exactly what he appeared to be, another layer in the legend, adding complexity without adding clarity. I don't know which of these is true. And that's the point. Every time you think you've found solid ground in this story, the floor drops out. There's one more piece of this puzzle, and it's the one that disturbs me the most. In the declassified MKUltra documents, there are references to something called operational testing. This was distinct from laboratory research. Operational testing meant taking a technique that had been developed in controlled conditions and deploying it in the real world, testing it on actual targets in actual environments, often without their knowledge or consent. The most infamous example of MKUltra operational testing is Operation Midnight Climax, in which the CIA set up safe houses in San Francisco and New York, hired sex workers to lure men to the locations, dosed them with LSD without their knowledge, and observed the results through one-way mirrors. The program ran from 1954 to 1963. It was completely illegal. The men who were drugged never knew what happened to them. Some of them had lasting psychological damage. Operational testing was, in essence, the moment when research became action. When the CIA stopped asking, "Can we do this?" and started asking, "Does this work on real people in real situations?" Subproject 119 was a research program. The Polybius legend, if it describes real events, would be an operational test. A controlled visual stimulus, delivered through a consumer device, to unwitting subjects, in a real-world environment, with data collection by field agents. That's not research anymore. That's deployment. And here's what keeps me awake. The MKUltra documents we have, the ones that survived Helm's shredding order, are estimated to represent only a fraction of the program's total output. Some researchers estimate we have documentation for as little as 20% of MKUltra's activities. The other 80% was destroyed. We know about 149 subprojects. We have partial documentation for some of them. We have almost nothing for others. And we know that the numbering is incomplete. There are gaps that suggest additional subprojects existed that are not represented even in the surviving financial records. What was in the 80% that was destroyed? What subprojects are we not even aware of? What operational tests were conducted that we will never know about because every scrap of evidence was turned to ash in a CIA incinerator in 1973? Polybius might be one of the things we were never supposed to find. A ghost that persisted in the memories of witnesses because you can shred a document, but you can't shred a 12-year-old's memory of the game that made him sick. Let me pull back for a moment and talk about what Polybius means, regardless of whether it was real. The reason the legend persists, the reason it has survived for over 40 years and shows no signs of dying, is not because people love a good ghost story, although they do. It's because Polybius taps into something true. Something that people feel in their bones even if they can't articulate it. We know, as a matter of documented historical fact, that the United States government experimented on its own citizens without their knowledge or consent. We know this happened repeatedly, over decades, across multiple programs. MKUltra. Operation Midnight Climax. The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiments. Operation Sea Spray, in which the Navy released bacteria over San Francisco to test biological warfare dispersal patterns. Operation LAC, in which the Army sprayed zinc cadmium sulfide across large swaths of the United States to simulate biological weapon attacks. These are not conspiracy theories. They are documented, acknowledged, and in some cases officially apologized for by the US government. Polybius endures because it fits a pattern that we know is real. The government has done things exactly like this. The only question is whether it did this specific thing. And that's a much harder question to dismiss than most skeptics are comfortable admitting. In 2017, a documentary filmmaker named John Frechette spent several months in Portland investigating the Polybius legend. He interviewed arcade owners, former players, and gaming historians. His findings were mixed. Some witnesses were clearly influenced by the legend, fitting their memories to the narrative. but others were not. He found two individuals who described specific, detailed memories of an unusual game in a Beaverton arcade that they had never connected to the Polybius legend because they weren't aware of it. One of them described the game's cabinet as plain, undecorated, without the elaborate artwork that characterized most arcade games of the era. Just a dark cabinet with a screen. The other described the visuals as unlike anything else in the arcade, geometric shapes that moved in patterns that made him feel dizzy and weird. He said he played the game 3 times and then never went back to it because it gave him a headache that lasted 2 days. Neither of these individuals could identify the game by name. Neither had heard of Polybius. Both were describing events from when they were between 11 and 14 years old. These accounts proved nothing. Memory is fallible, especially childhood memory, especially over a span of 35 years. But they're consistent. And they're consistent in ways that a fabricated legend wouldn't necessarily predict. The detail about the plain cabinet, for instance, is not part of the standard Polybius narrative. Most retellings describe an elaborate or unusual cabinet. But if the game was a research tool, a prototype built for function rather than commercial appeal, a plain cabinet is exactly what you'd expect. I want to talk about what happened after 1981. If Polybius was an operational test of visual stimulus technology, it raises an obvious and terrifying question: what were the results? And what was done with them? We live in a world saturated with screens. The average American spends over 7 hours a day looking at electronic displays. We carry them in our pockets. We put them on our walls. We strap them to our faces. We fall asleep to them and wake up to them. Our children grow up swimming in an ocean of directed visual content. The technology that Subproject 119 was investigating in 1981, the use of electronic visual displays to influence psychological states, is now the foundational technology of our civilization. I'm not saying your phone is a CIA mind control device. I'm saying that the line of research MKUltra was pursuing didn't stop when MKUltra was officially terminated. The questions the program was asking: how do you use screens to influence behavior, attention, emotional state, and decision-making, are now the questions that drive the largest and most profitable industry in human history. Social media algorithms that maximize engagement by triggering emotional responses. Video game designs built around compulsion loops that exploit dopamine pathways. Autoplay features that override the user's intention to stop watching. Notification systems designed to create anxiety when you're away from your device. These are the commercial descendants of the same research paradigm that MKUltra was pursuing. The CIA wanted to know if screens could control minds. Silicon Valley found out they could, and they monetized it. Whether or not Polybius was real, the technology it represents certainly is. The question isn't whether screens can influence behavior. We know they can. The question is whether that capability was first developed as a weapon before it became a product. There's a name I haven't mentioned yet, and it's the name of the legend itself. Polybius. Polybius was a Greek historian who lived in the 2nd century BCE. He is best known for his work The Histories, a comprehensive account of the rise of the Roman Republic. But Polybius was also a political theorist, and his most influential contribution to political thought was his theory of anacyclosis, the cycle of political transformation. According to Polybius, every form of government naturally degenerates into a corrupt version of itself. Monarchy becomes tyranny. Aristocracy becomes oligarchy. Democracy becomes autocracy, mob rule. And then the cycle begins again. The choice of this name for a legendary CIA mind control device is either a remarkable coincidence or a deliberate and deeply cynical reference. A game named after the man who described the inevitable corruption of democratic systems, used by a government agency to experiment on the citizens it was supposed to protect. If someone chose that name on purpose, they had a dark sense of humor. And a clear understanding of what they were doing. Let me bring this to a close by telling you what I believe, and more importantly, what I don't know. I believe that MKUltra was real, because it was. I believe that Subproject 119 investigated visual stimulus technology, because the documents say it did. I believe that a CIA contractor in Portland, Oregon was involved in this research in or around 1981, because the records indicate this. I believe that multiple people in the Portland area have independent memories of an unusual arcade game from the early 1980s that doesn't correspond to any known commercial release. I believe that the absence of physical evidence is consistent with both explanations, that the game never existed, or that it existed and was deliberately erased. I do not know if Polybius was real. I don't think anyone living knows for certain, except possibly the people who created it, if it existed, and they're not talking. But here's what I keep coming back to. We have a legend that describes a specific thing happening in a specific place at a specific time. And we have declassified government documents that confirm the government was doing that specific thing in that specific place at that specific time. The legend says, a game in Portland in 1981 used visual patterns to affect players' minds, and men in suits collected the data. The documents say, a CIA program in Portland in 1981 researched using visual displays to affect people's minds, and the project was classified. At what point does a legend stop being a legend and start being a leak? At what point does an urban myth become an urban memory, the scattered, distorted recollections of something that actually happened to real people who were never supposed to talk about it? I don't have the answer. The documents we have raised more questions than they resolve. The witnesses are aging. The physical evidence, if it ever existed, is almost certainly gone. The CIA is not going to confirm or deny anything, because confirming would be an admission of illegal experimentation on minors, and denying would be a lie that could be disproven by the next FOIA release. We're left in the space between proof and suspicion. Between what we can demonstrate and what we can feel is true. It's an uncomfortable space. It's supposed to be. Because that's where they want you. That's where the ambiguity protects them. Not enough evidence to prove it, but too much evidence to dismiss it. A perfect gray zone where the truth can hide indefinitely. 42 years ago, something may have appeared in the arcades of Portland, Oregon. Something that wasn't just a game. Something that was watching the players as closely as the players were watching it. Something that was collecting data on what happened to young minds when you fed them the right patterns at the right frequencies. And then it vanished. Pulled from the arcades. Scrubbed from the records. Left to survive only as a story just unbelievable enough that no one would take it seriously. Until the documents came out. Until the classified became the declassified. Until the legend turned out to have a shadow that looked exactly like the truth. The game is gone. The cabinets are gone. The records are mostly gone. But the question remains, glowing in the dark like a vector graphic on a screen in a Portland arcade in 1981. What did they build? What did it do to the people who played it? And what did they do with what they learned? What do you think really happened? Was Polybius a myth, a memory, or a mission? Leave your theory below. Because 42 years later, someone out there knows the answer. And maybe, just maybe, they're watching this right now.